What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 8 top 40 running back rankings. Honestly, a really strong week for running backs. Not a ton of injuries, some favorable matchups, no bye weeks. If you guys enjoy the video, hit that like button, subscribe. Any questions, drop them down below. But let's just dive right into the rankings here. We're going to start off in Tier 1. These are your studs. I wouldn't get too caught up on, this guy's number 2, this guy's number 3. We're going Kenneth Walker, Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, Breece Hall, Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Bijan Robinson. If you guys have these players on your rosters, they're obviously going into your lineup. I think the top 5, probably not going to be a ton of debate. Number 6, I like Jahmyr Gibbs here. Coming off his best fantasy game of the season, the Lions are first in implied points. They're 11.5-point favorites. Jahmyr Gibbs is always going to have that receiving upside, but I think this specific matchup is definitely going to favor the running backs here, both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. And then for Bijan, coming off of back-to-back really strong games, 25.5 and 23.3 PPR points, also kind of separated himself from Algier in the usage. In his 25-point game, he was still splitting with Algier pretty much close to 50-50. Last week, really pulled away. Hopefully he maintains that moving forward. Now shifting into tier 2, kind of a larger tier, but with a lot of quality options. We're going to go with Kareem Hunt going up against the Raiders. He has been the workhorse here for this Chiefs offense. 49 carries in his last 2 games. In those 2, he has put up 18.7 and 22.3 PPR points. This should be a favorable game script for him to rack up a lot of volume. The Chiefs are 9.5-point favorites here, going up against the Raiders. Then I have Jordan Mason against the Cowboys. I bumped him up a few spots from my rankings earlier on in the week. I think the 49ers offense getting Debo back this week is going to be big. Just kind of raises the ceiling of this offense. And Jordan Mason isn't someone who's going to be super involved as a pass catcher. So it's not like missing out on the weapons is going to help him in terms of his receiving usage. I think more touchdown upside if Debo's in the lineup. It's a nice matchup here against the Cowboys. They've allowed the 4th most points per game to the running back position. Then I'm going to go with Devon Achane. Achane has been my guy. I was really high on him heading into the season. Through the first 2 weeks, when Tua was healthy, it looked like he was going to be a smash pick. Had a really strong workload, 7 targets in both of those first 2 games. Obviously, this entire offense has just self-destructed with Tua out of the lineup. But I think with Tua back, Devon Achane is going to be a very strong running back 1 play. Then I have David Montgomery going up against the Titans. Kind of talked about it with Jahmyr Gibbs. I think this is definitely going to be a favorable game script for these running backs. 11.5-point favorites here. David Montgomery really coming off his only down game of the season. I think he'll be fine. Then I have Josh Jacobs going up against the Jaguars. The Jaguars are 6th in points per game allowed to the running back position. The Packers are number 2 in implied points. Josh Jacobs is coming off his best fantasy game of the season. A lot of things, pointing in a favorable spot here for Josh Jacobs. Then I have DeAndre Swift going up against the Commanders. He's coming off a bye week, but before that bye, he had put up 20 plus PPR points in his last 3 games. So after a rough start, he's really been balling out over the last few weeks. Definitely seems like a solid play moving forward. Then I have James Conner going up against the Dolphins. Conner's been a nice RB2 option at the running back position. It's a pretty favorable matchup here against the Dolphins. They've allowed the 2nd most points per game to the running back position. James Conner's been productive without really hitting in the touchdown department. If those touchdowns can follow, I do think he could be a running back 1 moving forward. Then I have J.K. Dobbins going up against the Saints. Very strong usage week to week, a ton of work on the ground, and it's a nice matchup here against the Saints, who have allowed the 5th most points per game to the running back spot. J.K. Dobbins has pretty much been cut and dry in terms of his games this season. Either he's getting that workload on the ground and he's super efficient, and the touchdowns are following and it's a big game, or he's getting that workload, he's not efficient, and the touchdowns are not there. I think this is one of those spots where he can be efficient and get into the end zone. And then the final guy on this tier is going to be Javonte Williams going up against the Panthers. The Panthers are the best matchup for opposing running backs. They've allowed the most points per game to the position. Javonte Williams is coming off a big week 7 against the Saints. 14 carries for 88 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Might be the start of a breakout here. He gets another nice matchup. I do like Javonte up here in tier 2. Now moving into tier 3, going to talk about Jonathan Taylor, Alvin Kamara, and James Cook. For JT here, he was a full participant on Thursday. He still didn't seem like he was super confident that he was going to play in this one. So if he does play, I think he's playable as a running back 2. Would be worried about a little bit of a dip in his usage, but just a situation and injury we'll have to monitor. Then I have Alvin Kamara going up against the Chargers. I do think not having Derek Carr is going to hurt him. In the 2 games without Carr, he's put up 17.4 and 8.4 PPR points. The Saints are also fourth fewest in implied point total, so their offense probably isn't going to be great. Kamara should still be involved as a pass catcher, but definitely not like the mid to high end RB1 play we saw early on when Derek Carr was at quarterback. And then the last guy in this tier is James Cook. And I do have like some workload concerns here with James Cook moving forward. I still think he's going to be the running back one here for the Bills, but Ray Davis has looked really impressive. He got the opportunity to be the clear-cut running back one when James Cook missed that one game, performed really well, played well last week. James Cook only 12 carries, 0 targets. He's also like not really dominating the receiving usage. You have Ty Johnson mixing in on third downs. He's not really dominating the goal line work. So I still think he's a solid running back to play, but the workload is a little bit scary moving forward. And then shifting into tier 4, going to start off with Tony Pollard going up against the Lions. This is a tough matchup here for Pollard. The Lions have allowed the second fewest points per game to the running back position. His workload has been solid though, 20 plus opportunities in each of his last 3 games. It's just going to be, can he overcome this offense? It's not a good unit. They're probably not going to be putting up a ton of points, but the workload's going to be there. Should be fairly involved as a pass catcher. Then I have Brian Robinson Jr. going up against the Bears. Now, this is going to depend on the health of Jaden Daniels. If Jaden Daniels is healthy, you could probably make a case he's up there in the tier 2 area. If it's not Jaden Daniels, I think, the offensive ceiling, the floor are both going to be lower. But for B-Rob, he's been super consistent, 10 plus PPR points in every single game. We'll just have to wait and see for the health of Jaden Daniels. Then I have Najee Harris going up against the Giants. Back-to-back big games, 14 for 106 and a touchdown, 21 for 102 and a touchdown. My concern here for Najee Harris is just I feel like he still has a very low weekly floor. We saw early on in the season, a lot of volume on the ground, not a ton of efficiency. If he's not getting into the end zone, it's just not going to happen fantasy-wise. And it's just because he is not involved as a pass catcher. Didn't really change a ton with Russ coming in. I think he's fine as like a back-end RB2, but maybe that's why I'm a little bit lower than other people, even though he's coming off of back-to-back nice games. Then I'm going to go with Chase Brown going up against the Eagles. He continues to kind of pull away from Zach Moss. In week 7, he had 17 opportunities compared to Zach Moss's 9. He's performed well. He has the touchdown upside on this offense, can catch passes. Overall, just a solid RB2 play. Then definitely a big riser. Rachaad White here going up against the Falcons. Seems like Bucky Irving is going to miss this week with the toe injury. He had kind of been in that 50-50 split with Bucky Irving, kind of devolved into like a 3-headed split. You throw Sean Tucker in there. But the fact that Bucky Irving, who was like the RB1/RB2, is likely not going to play this week, that's a huge plus here for Rachaad White. He's coming off a pretty huge game in week 7, 10 carries, 6 receptions, 71 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. I think these running backs are definitely going to be used in the pass game with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin missing time. I think Rachaad White's going to be a factor here, like him as an RB2. And then the last guy in this tier, definitely a big faller. It is going to be Chuba Hubbard going up against the Broncos. With Andy Dalton at quarterback, like Chuba had been a set it and forget it running back one week to week. The problem is we have Bryce Young coming back in. Now, Bryce Young could look a lot better than he did in the first 2 games, but in the first 2 games with Young at quarterback, we saw Chuba Hubbard put up 1.4 and 11.6 PPR points. The production just wasn't even close to what we saw with Andy Dalton at quarterback. So a little bit concerned about Chuba Hubbard, but still think he's playable here as like a fringe RB2 option. Now, moving into tier 5, going to start off this tier with Ramondre Stevenson. I think the fact that Drake May is playing well, is definitely a plus long-term for Ramondre here. Going to have some receiving upside. Should be the running back one in his second game back from injury. Then I have Nick Chubb going up against the Ravens here. Not the worst usage in his first game back. 11 carries, 3 targets, only 22 rushing yards, 1 reception for 10 yards. He did get into the end zone on the ground. The tough thing is this is not a great matchup here against this Ravens run defense, but I still think Chubb is going to get the valuable opportunities. I don't think it's impossible that like Winston puts up some points on this Ravens defense, which is going to give, Nick Chubb some potential goal line looks here. Then I have Tank Bigsby going up against the Packers. Tank Bigsby is a pretty tough player to rank here. First off, because we don't know exactly what the situation is with Travis Etienne. Sounds like he's going to be a game-time decision. And I know he's coming off of this monster game, 26 carries, 118 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. But Tank Bigsby has been very game script proof early on this season. Even when Etienne was healthy, like Tank Bigsby looking great on the ground, he was not the guy in there on third downs when they're losing. He's not in the game. We saw the same thing when Etienne left with injury. You had Dearness Johnson, kind of taking over once they were trailing. So they're 4.5-point underdogs here against the Packers. I'd be worried about him kind of losing out on work to either Travis Etienne or to Dearness Johnson. I will say, if Etienne cannot play, I'd probably bump Tank Bigsby up to like maybe the top of this tier, could argue him towards the bottom of tier 4. But my concern is just the fact that he does seem super game script proof. Now, maybe he looked so good last week that, they'll change things up. But with what we've seen so far, they do not want him in there on third downs, and they do not want him in there when they are trailing. Then I'm going to go with the final guy in this tier, Rico Dowdle, going up against the 49ers. Last 3 games, 13.1, 19.4, and 10.5 PPR points. He's been fairly productive. Should be the Cowboys running back 1. Now looking at tier 6, we have some leaders of some gross backfields, maybe some RB2s on some better backfields. Going to start off here, Travis Etienne. Like I said, could be a game time decision on Sunday. I do think this is a spot where he could come back. Jaguars are trailing. This could be a decent game for Travis Etienne, just based on the fact that they're underdogs. So I do think he's somewhat playable if he is healthy. Then I have Sean Tucker going up against the Falcons. Mentioned Bucky Irving, probably not going to play this week. And we saw earlier on in the season that when Rachaad White missed time, people thought Bucky Irving was going to be this clear-cut running back 1. I think people might think Rachaad White's going to be this clear-cut running back 1. We saw Sean Tucker step up, take 14 carries, dominate on the ground, dominate through the air with 3 targets. So I do think he is going to have a role if Bucky Irving does miss, and could be playable if you're really desperate. Then I have Tyrone Tracy going up against the Steelers. Week 7, it did look like he was getting the running back 1 opportunities. Still wasn't a great workload, 6 carries, 3 targets, 2 Singletaries, 5 carries, 1 target. But we did see that when Singletary missed those 2 games, Tyrone Tracy played very well. With what we saw last week, it does seem like he's leaning towards being the running back 1 here. Just not a great matchup here against the Steelers. Giants O-line really been struggling. Then I'm going to go with Alexander Mattison up next. He's actually been pretty productive, 10 plus PPR points in his last 3 games. He had 26 opportunities in week 7. This is just a really, really tough matchup here. The Chiefs have allowed by far the fewest points per game to the running back position, I think by like over 3 points per game. So it's been a really, really rough matchup. I also think Zamir White could see a larger workload than he did last week. He was coming back from injury, wasn't super involved. Then after Madison, going to go with Zach Moss. Does look to be the running back 2 here for the Bengals, but he can still filter in, get some valuable opportunities on the goal line, and could potentially get into the end zone. Then I have Raheem Mostert going up against the Cardinals. In week 7, we saw him get 11 carries, took the goal line snaps. That type of usage in a game with Tua back definitely could be playable for fantasy. And then the final tier here, it's going to be tier 7, starting off with Austin Eckler. Not coming off a great game in week 7. The matchup here against the Bears is interesting because if there's no Jane Daniels, maybe it's a trailing game script. He's going to get involved as a pass catcher. Just doesn't have a super high weekly floor or ceiling, but he has been fairly playable in most of the matchups this year. Then I have Justice Hill going up against the Browns. It's tough to play Justice Hill just because the floor is very low, but he's just had these like random solid games. Like he's hit 11 plus PPR points 3 times. Obviously that's not like crazy production or anything, but when we're getting into RB4 territory, like that's what you're looking at. Then we have Tyler Algier going up against the Bucks. Seemed like he was kind of working his way into a solid committee with Bijan Robinson. Based on what we saw last week, that's not looking great for Algier. Then I have Roshan Johnson going up against the Commanders. You're kind of just hoping for a goal line carry or 2, hoping he gets into the end zone. It's happened a few times in their last couple of games. And then the last guy here, Ray Davis, going up against the Seahawks. Someone who I do think is going to work in on the ground, could get some goal line looks, and has looked really impressive, in his opportunities over the last couple of weeks. Now that's going to wrap it up for my top 40 running backs. If you guys enjoy the video, hit that like button, subscribe. Any questions, drop them down below. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.